Chester and Gus by Cammie McGovern. How to not talk. This scares me. It's been more than a week since the seizure, and Gus still hasn't talked to me once. I've been trying every evening, asking different questions like, how was the hospital? Did you see any dead things? I like seeing dead things, but maybe that's not true for people. Now I ask, how's Mama and her steaming machine? He doesn't answer. Maybe he's mad at me because I can't come to school anymore. I want to come to school, I tell him in the morning while he's getting ready. I wish I could. Mr. McGregor said no. For a long time, he eats his oatmeal and doesn't say anything. Do you want me to come back? I finally say. He might say no, I remind myself. He might say, I don't like the way the girls crowd around me to pet you. You cause too much commotion. I can't blame him if he says this because it's true. He doesn't know I'm there for him doing a job. He doesn't know that I found him in the closet. It's not his job to remember everything I do for him or say thank you. He doesn't answer my questions. That's okay, I tell myself. Gus is still my person, and I still have a job. I'm just not sure what it is these days. I want to remind Sarah about teaching me to read. Even if it doesn't work for me, it might help Gus get more interested in using a word board or his computer. He has those things, he just never uses them. Sarah's forgotten about that idea now because she has another idea that's taking all her time. She's reading the laws about service dogs. It turns out there are some exceptions to the rules with children who have autism. Apparently, if we got a judge to approve of Chester as a service dog because of Gus's autism, he'd be allowed to go into the public areas of school with him, like the cafeteria and the playground. The classroom isn't considered a public area, so he'd have to stay in the main office for most of the day, but Gus could take him outside for recess and when he goes to lunch. Is that a terrible idea? Mark makes a face. That sounds like a dog is spending a lot of time in an office where a dog really isn't meant to be. But he'd be there. Gus could visit him any time he asked to. Mark bends down in front of her. Can you picture Gus asking to visit Chester in the principal's office? She puts her hand over her face and shakes her head. I think she's saying no. She can't picture it. I can't either. Gus doesn't ask for me out loud. But there are a lot of things he likes and doesn't ask for out loud, like Mama in her dish room, like sparkly pens. I remember Penny once saying, part of your job will be understanding what your person needs even if they don't say it. I think that she was right. But how can I do my job if I only see Gus a few hours in the afternoon when he's too tired to talk? That night, I go into Gus's room like I always do while he's getting ready for bed. I watch Sarah brush his teeth and hold his pajama bottoms open. I don't think he'll say anything because I've sat here every night since he's come home from the hospital and he hasn't said a thing. Still, I want to be here if he does. I think about some of our old conversations when he told me the things he's afraid of, when he said he loves his parents but sometimes they touch him too much and it hurts his skin. I remember this and never get up on Gus's bed the way I get on the bed with Sarah. Tonight, instead of waiting for Gus to say something, I start talking to myself. I can't help it. I tell him I've been lonely sitting at home with no one but Sarah, who has her own job to do. I wish I had a job again, I say, and someplace to go like school. I don't mean to sound pathetic. I'm afraid I do anyway, but now that I've started, I can't stop. It's quiet at home. I like being at school watching out for you. I like going out for recess and all the smells of science time and stopping by Mama and her machine. I sound like someone who hasn't had anyone to talk to in months. Gus climbs into bed without looking at me. Sarah comes in first to kiss him goodnight. Mark comes in later to sit with Gus for a bit and pat his back in the right rhythm. Mark likes to hum as he does this. I don't think Gus likes the humming, but I do. It makes me sleepy enough to curl up on the rug next to his bed. Even though I spent all day sleeping, I'm tired from all the talking I just did. I'm tired because it's hard being around Sarah's worry all day. Even when she's working, she's thinking about Gus. She's wondering if she should call the school to check on him. She's staring at me like she'd feel better if I could just go back to school again. Even if you're pretending to sleep through all this, it's tiring. Great family pet. After 2 weeks without a seizure, everyone agrees that Gus isn't in any immediate danger anymore. Sarah tells Mark the nurse doesn't need to stay with him in the classroom any longer, which makes her feel a little bit better, but not much. Everything is back to the way it was before, except Gus takes pills now and sleeps more, and I don't go to school with him. Chester is a great family pet, Mark says, trying to cheer Sarah up. And he's here every afternoon for Gus to come home to. I don't know why great family pet seems like a sad, disappointing thing to be. I guess when you know how good it is doing a job, you want more. You just do. Maybe I want too much. At night when I run outside for my last pee, I don't even bark anymore to the other dogs nearby. I feel like I don't have anything to say to them. Sarah knows how I feel. She feels it too. One day at lunch, she looks up from her soup and says, "I know, Chess. I know you don't want to be home here with me." I look at her carefully. I wasn't saying anything just now, but I wonder if she's heard me other times. I do an experiment that afternoon. I sit outside her open office door and say, "There are raccoons right now digging through the garbage." There aren't really, but I know she hates raccoons and the mess they make. If she can hear me, she'll jump up and start banging pots and pans. I wait for a second. She turns her head from the computer as if she hears a bird, maybe, or something else in the distance, and then nothing. No, I decide she doesn't hear me. A mystery. Today there's a new mystery. I know a little bit about mysteries from the TV shows I tried to watch with Penny. She liked the ones that featured people who weren't typical detectives because they were blind or had something I never understood called OCD. She liked them because usually the person's weakness made them a good detective. Like the blind guy could smell some clues better than other people. Most people are such poor smellers, it doesn't surprise me that a decent one can get his own TV show. Watching those shows has taught me enough to know right away that I'm looking at a possible crime when Gus gets off the van from school and there's a big bandage across his nose. There are also 2 dark circles under his eyes. He looks like he's wearing a mask with very bad eye makeup. Sarah screams when she sees it, then puts her hand over her mouth. "Oh my gosh, what happened, Gus?" He doesn't say, of course. He gets around Sarah by walking the same way he does at school, up on his toes, pressed close to the wall. Sarah opens his backpack and pulls out the blue book where there is a note from the nurse that she reads aloud. "Gus had an accident on the playground late in the day today. He was on the far side of the climbing structure where teachers couldn't see him. When they called, he came out from under the structure with a cut on his nose. He was taken to the nurse and cleaned up, but he couldn't tell us how he'd gotten the cut. We left a voicemail message. The nurse thinks that his injury might look worse than it actually is." Sarah is mad, and I don't blame her. I'm mad too. "He's autistic," Sarah screams, even though Mark's not home to hear her, only me. "Of course he can't tell her what happened." Gus has only been home for a little while, but already his face looks worse. The purple circles under his eyes are getting bigger and blacker. Sarah puts ice on his nose, which he doesn't like. He moans and says, "Nis." He makes it worse by touching his nose and crying when it hurts. "I'm taking him to the hospital. I think he might have broken his nose. Don't you think I should take him to the hospital, Chester?" I don't like hospitals because I don't know what happens in them, but I do agree it looks bad. Gus lies down on his bed and I can see blood crusted inside his nose. I want to lick it, but I stop myself. When Mark gets home, Sarah tells him what Mr. McGregor said when she called the school. "There was a substitute nurse, which is why I got that strange note that didn't take any of his seizure history into account. Apparently, there was another child under the wooden climbing structure. He didn't know Gus was under there until he heard him crying," he says. "It was probably Ed," I say. Ed isn't nice, and whatever story he told is probably a lie. Of course she doesn't hear. I go over to Gus, who's curled up on the sofa. "Did Ed do something to you under the climbing structure?" He rolls over so I can't look at his face. I put my chin on his leg. I don't really need an answer. I know it was. Before I left school, Ed started playing a new trick on younger kids where he offered to push them on the tire swing, and then wouldn't stop or let them off when they started to scream. Gus probably stood too near the tire swing and got hit. That's my guess. I wish Gus could tell them this himself. If he can't, I wish they could understand me so I could tell them. Sarah thinks it's something else. "He obviously had a seizure, Mark. We need to get him to the hospital and have him checked." Sarah's pulling on her coat, but Mark doesn't move. "Not everything is a seizure, Sayer. You remember they told us that." Takes a good sniff around Gus's leg. I remember the way he smelled when I found him in the closet, sharp and metallic. He doesn't smell like a seizure now. "He was by himself under the playground, under the play structure. He's a seizure-prone child, and they let him wander away to a dark tunnel where he couldn't be seen. I don't understand what they were thinking." "They were letting him play with another kid. That's what we've always wanted." "Not anymore. He could have hurt himself. He did hurt himself. Look at him, Mark. I have, sir. I think the nurse is right. It might look worse than it is. If it looks bad, it is bad. He obviously had a seizure on their watch, and they don't want to admit it because it means they'll have to hire the expensive nurse again. It's infuriating. Look, I agree there's a problem, but we don't have to assume the worst right away. I'd like to talk to the teachers and wait a little bit to see what Gus can tell us. See what Gus can tell us? Do you hear yourself? Gus can't tell us anything. That's why we have to protect him. Being nice to school doesn't help him. If we storm over to the school this afternoon, what are we going to ask them to do? Keep Gus inside every day at recess? They'll just tell us it's time to consider the out-of-district placement and send him so far away we'll only see him on the weekends. This conversation is so sad, I move to Gus's head and sniff at the back of his ear. It's not your fault they're fighting, I whisper. This is what grown-ups do. Gus rolls over and looks at me. His face looks even worse than it did a little while ago. For the first time in days, he looks me in the eyes. It's hard to look back in his. They're purple and yellow now. But still, I can see something in his face. He's trying to tell me he didn't have a seizure. Ed did this to him. I don't want Gus to be sent away. If he's sent away, I really won't be able to do my job. I need to find a way for Gus to tell them what happened.